Hello everyone! Today I'm going to be making my predictions for the upcoming 2019 to 2020 NHL regular season. After a very long, grueling summer filled with RFA drama, the season is finally about to start this week, and I think it's time that I look at all the divisions and say where each team is going to end up and who is going to make the playoffs. Starting with the Atlantic Division. Now, the Atlantic Division is a pretty easy one to call this year because, well, there have been some minor changes in the teams. Nothing very huge has happened, and the big three of Tampa, Boston, and Toronto are all pretty much the same teams, and all are pretty much not really done much to make them better than any of the others, and no one below them has really done any huge moves to crack into the top three. So in the Atlantic Division, I have the Tampa Bay Lightning coming in first, Boston Bruins coming in second, and the Toronto Maple Leafs rounding out the top three in the playoff spots. And then I have the Florida Panthers coming in fourth, and I believe that the Florida Panthers will make the playoffs in a wild card spot. The Panthers have been very, very close the past couple of years to making the playoffs, and I believe that with the addition of Sergei Bobrovsky, if he has any sort of good form, if he can be a solid goaltender, which is something that the Panthers have lacked in past years, this team will make the playoffs 100%. If Bobrovsky doesn't work out and he's not a good goalie for them, they easily drop way out of a playoff spot, and potentially the Habs can move into fourth and take that wildcard spot. Moving on to number 5 is Montreal. They have a very solid team, very young. A lot of how they do this season will depend on Carey Price, if he can stay healthy, if he can return to form. If he does that, Montreal is a very good chance of making the playoffs. But if not, 5th is a pretty reasonable spot for them to end up in. Buffalo, I have coming in 6th. The Sabres keep showing flashes of potentially becoming the squad and the team that they were predicted to be way back when they were tanking for the likes of Jack Eichel. But for right now, they just have too many holes to really be a true playoff contender. And yes, Eichel's good, Reinhart's good, Ristolainen's good. They just don't have the goaltending, really. They don't have the depth, and I don't really see them being too much of a threat to make the playoffs. In 7th, I have Detroit, who are starting to have some pieces come together, but they're still very much rebuilding. And in 8th, I have the Ottawa Senators, who this year get to tank for finally their own first-round pick after the mess that was the Duchesne trade had their first-round pick last year going to Colorado. So Ottawa really just didn't do anything to suggest that they would be much better this season, so I still have them at the bottom of the Atlantic. Next up, we have the Metropolitan Division. Now the Metro is so hard to call this year because feasibly any team here could make the playoffs if things go right for them. And that makes it just so difficult to call. Literally the order here could be completely different than what I have. It is probably the only division where basically every team in the division has a very strong shot at making the playoffs. But what I have is I have the Washington Capitals in first place. The Caps have just been too good in the past couple of years. They've dominated the Metro in the past couple of years to not come at least in the playoffs. So I think that for sure they are probably still the top team in the Metro. In 2nd, I have Carolina. Carolina made some big moves over the summer. The Falk trade was good for them. Their only real question is in net. They have James Reimer and Peter Mrazek, both guys who at times have shown the ability to possibly be a starter, but none of them have really taken over the role, at least since 2013 when Reimer basically carried the Leafs into a playoff spot. But since then, neither of these two guys have really shown a real ability to be a starting goaltender. So for Carolina, if their goaltending situation is good and those two guys are solid for them, easily a top team in the Metro. If not, they probably end up middle of the pack fighting for a wild card spot. In 3rd, I have the New Jersey Devils. The Devils basically became a contender this summer, drafting Jack Hughes, getting PK Subban, getting Wayne Simmons. They just made too many moves and got too many quality players to not challenge for a playoff spot. I think that they have a decent chance of making it, and I think that with a full season of Taylor Hall being healthy, they completely and entirely easily make the playoffs. Now in fourth, I have the Pittsburgh Penguins, and I have them in a wildcard spot. Now, the Penguins on paper, yes, as a team are worse than the Islanders, no doubt about that. But I have the Penguins ahead of them because you should never, ever doubt Sidney Crosby. That man single-handedly is probably enough to get this team into the playoffs. He is just a man on a mission. He's something else. And I do not see a Crosby-led Penguins missing the playoffs, especially since they've made it for like 10 or 11 years in a row now. There is no way that the Penguins miss the playoffs this season. In fifth, I have the New York Islanders. I know it's a disappointing drop for them, but just the rest of the Metro is so good right now, and like I could very feasibly see them in a playoff spot. As I've said, anyone in this division can make it into the playoffs. But the Islanders, they got Varlamov to try and solve their goaltending problem after Leonard left, but I don't know if Varlamov is going to be in Vezina Varlamov form or Varlamov form, and just the fact that the team as a whole seemed to overperform last season makes me think they're going to have a bit of a regression this year and possibly miss the playoffs. In sixth, I have the Rangers. The Rangers are a very weird team this year because they went from looking like they're going to rebuild to drafting Capo Caco, trading for Jacob Trouba, and then signing Artemi Panarin. So, well, I still think they have a lot of holes and they're not quite back into being a full contender yet. They are still a pretty decent team, and like with a crazy run by Panarin, and if Henrik Lundqvist can just continue to be Henrik Lundqvist even at 37, they have a decent shot at the playoffs. In seventh, I have Philadelphia. The Flyers are just a mind-boggling team because they have some very talented players, and they just seem to utterly waste the careers of Jacob Voracek and Claude Giroux. And yes, they have some very talented young defenders. They have some talented young players all around. And Carter Hart in net is going to hopefully solve all their issues once he fully develops into an NHL starter. Just for right now, I don't see the Flyers being better than a lot of these teams in this very strong Metro division. And then in eighth, I have the Columbus Blue Jackets, who went from the craziest all-in run I've ever seen to losing everyone in free agency. Basically, all their star players left. Panarin, Duchesne, Bobrovsky, they all buggered off, leaving the Blue Jackets with a huge question mark in net, not really knowing who's going to score for them. Their defense is still pretty solid. They didn't really lose much, didn't lose anything on the blue line. But the Blue Jackets just, everything that was a strength to them left over the summer, and with that they are probably nowhere close to being a playoff contender in this incredibly strong Metro. Now, moving on to the Western Conference and the Central Division. The Central, again, very tight, a lot of teams that could all feasibly make the playoffs. But what I have is, in first place, the Nashville Predators. The Predators have been a cup contender for a couple of years now, and then this summer they went and got Matt Duchesne just to bolster that offense and fix their center issues. And with that, I think they should solidly come and finish in first in this division yet again. In second, I have the defending Stanley Cup champion St. Louis Blues. They did not lose very much of their roster for a team that won the Stanley Cup, and basically are rolling into the new season with the same team. Plus they got Justin Falk, so they are a contender yet again. I don't see a back-to-back in their future just because of how tight the league is right now, but I do see them solidly making the playoffs. Third, I have the Dallas Stars. The Stars now got Joe Pavelski this summer. They are just a solid team, and they have been for the past couple of years. They've been a playoff team for the past couple of years, and I just think that this is the year that they make the playoffs, not as a wild card, but in the top three in their division. In fourth, I have the Colorado Avalanche. The Avs went out and got Nazem Kadri to give them some depth up front, although they had to lose Tyson Barrie to do it. But they are no longer a one-line team, and I think that fact is going to benefit them and have them come in fourth and solidly in a wild card spot in this division. In fifth, I have the Winnipeg Jets, who have really not had a good summer. You had a fantastic defensive group, and then it's just gone. Trouba traded, Myers left in free agency, Dustin Buffligan, who knows what he's doing, and the Jets defense right now just has a big, huge question mark next to it, and that is not a good thing. Their forward group is still good enough that I think they will make the playoffs in the wildcard spot, but I don't like what's happened to this D group. I think they're going to be a little shaken up with how many people left to start the season, and they might start off a little weak, but they will probably, hopefully, end up in a playoff spot. In 6th, I have the Blackhawks. You know, it's been 5 years almost since the Blackhawks last won the Stanley Cup. There have been 4 teams who have lifted the Stanley Cup since the last time the Blackhawks did it. Yet, still, when I write down the Blackhawks in 6, I'm like, but they're the Blackhawks. They're the Stanley Cup dynasty Blackhawks. And yes, they still have the core group from those Stanley Cup runs, but they're all not very useful players anymore. I mean, like, Kane and Taves, they're still very, very good, but they're not what they were. Kane is still an elite scorer in this league. There's just, especially on the blue line, that they've really been hurt, and they lost a lot of their offensive depth to the point where it basically is solely Kane and Taves. So the Blackhawks, I just continue to see them not really being a playoff team. And the Minnesota Wild are not a bad team, but they're in a very strong division, and because of that, they look a lot worse than they are, I think. And just due to the fact that I don't see them being better than any of the other teams in this division, I don't have them making the playoffs. If they were in like the Pacific, which is a weaker division this year, they'd not be in a playoff spot, but they'd be a lot closer to one. But just in this division right here, I don't see them really pushing for it or having that big of a chance of making the playoffs. And now for the Pacific Division. The Pacific is weird because unlike most of the other divisions where I didn't know who was going to make the playoffs, in this one I didn't know what to do after the playoffs because, let's be fully honest, this division is 2 or 3 pretty decent teams, and then the rest of the division is kind of a mess of rebuilding or just not knowing what you're really doing. To start off, I see Calgary repeating as top of the Pacific. Well, they did not add very much this offseason. I can just see with the continued development of Matthew Tkachuk and Sam Bennett, I can see having a good year finally. This team just is probably going to be about the same level as they were last year, and no one else in this division that was close to them has really improved and gotten much better. So I think that Calgary is going to finish off in first. They're still a contender. It's just they need one of Riddick or Cam Talbot to step up and be a very solid goaltender. And honestly, I could see like Cam Talbot, his first season in the Oilers was fantastic. And I feel like he was just overworked there and slowed down because of that. So possibly with a sort of two-headed goalie rotation of Riddick and Talbot, the Flames can keep both of those guys fresh, keep both of those guys stopping pucks. They're both very good goaltenders. And with that level of goaltending, add that to the crazy defense they have and the pretty wicked offense they also have, they just continue to be a force in the Pacific. Second, I have Vegas. Same deal as the Flames, basically, just keeping on pace. They have a very strong team. They inked Mark Stone to the long-term deal after they traded him, so they're going to have a full season of him. The only major concern for the Golden Knights is if Fleury starts to slow down. They don't really have much in the backup goalie department, so they need someone to supplement Fleury as Fleury gets older and then hopefully replace him. But right now they are kind of lacking in that category, and they really do need to have someone really step in and be a very viable option if Fleury goes down or just can't play as much as he can as he gets older. And third, I have the San Jose Sharks. The Sharks are getting older. They lost Joe Pavelski. They signed Erik Karlsson to a crazy long expensive deal, which was a huge question mark because he hasn't been the same in 2 years. So the Sharks, I can see starting to have problems in the next couple of years, but for right now, I think they're definitely still a playoff team, especially in the Pacific, but I don't really see them as a contender anymore. And I just realized I wrote these team names down after Calgary and Vegas by the actual team name and not the city. Just whatever, I'm just gonna roll with it. The Coyotes are making some moves. They're a team on the up. They made some moves this summer. They got Phil Kessel, which, I mean, that's always a win. I don't see them as a playoff team just yet, but they're a team that's starting to become a playoff contender. And I think if they have a strong season and the Sharks have a bad season, they could probably easily sneak into a playoff spot. In fifth, I have the Edmonton Oilers. The Oilers are not lower because Connor McDavid, but they're not higher because the rest of the team is not Connor McDavid. Honestly, I don't know what's been going on in Edmonton, but the decisions that have been made there have not been the right ones. The James Neal-Milan Lucic trade was a steal because James Neal has had one bad season. I could see him turning back into a 25-goal scorer, especially if he's playing on a line with Connor McDavid. But overall, the Oilers just have too many problems. Their solution to their goaltending issue was a even older Mike Smith, and 2 years ago I was making fun of the Flames for thinking a 37-year-old Mike Smith was the solution to their problems, and now the Oilers are thinking that a 39-year-old Mike Smith is the solution to their problems. I don't care how good Mike Smith was in 2011. He's not the goaltending solution to your problems anymore. In sixth, I have the Vancouver Canucks. They're another team that's on the up. Brock Besser, Elias Pettersson have all been very good. They have a good young group. I think they're still a couple pieces away from being a true playoff contender, but they are a team that's definitely on the rise. In seventh, I have the LA Kings. They are a team in full rebuild mode, but I have them not in last place in the group because the team below them, the Ducks, is in even more of a full rebuild mode. So those two teams both are basically just tanking this season. They're both rebuilding. The Kings I have above the Ducks basically based off of the fact that they have Drew Doughty, and Drew Doughty is a really good hockey player. And it's just a shame that Drew Doughty is now going to have a couple of years of his, not prime, but just past his prime, wasted, playing for a team that is in complete and utter full rebuild mode. And yeah, the Ducks also rebuilding, except the John Gibson factor may move them up past the Kings, possibly past the Canucks, but again, a shame that a great goaltender in John Gibson is being wasted right now on the fact that he's on a team in full rebuild mode. So yeah, that does it for my predictions for this upcoming NHL season. Tell me what you think and what your predictions are in the comments down below. If you like this video, hit like. If you want to see more of my stuff, hit subscribe. Follow me on Twitter, link is down below in the description, and I will see you next time.